Hi, we're Quentin Curious Volumes. My name is James. Today is a Saturday, and I'm going to do, consequently, a Friday Reads. Tell you what all I read this week. I finished two books. I finished two books. The ones I finished, not so great. But let's go through them. One is Citizen, an American lyric by Claudia Rankine. Now, this is a very mixed experience for me. It is allegedly a book of poetry and essays, and it's from 2014. It also has some photographs interspersed throughout, and it's in, I think, 7 or 8 sections. Some of them are basically prose poetry, and so some of the sections are just purely just these like 1 or 2 page prose poems that mostly revolve around what they used to, and I guess what they still call, microaggressions. These are incidents in the life of a narrator who is apparently, I think we are to assume, is African American, and experiences she has being microaggressed by people who are not. So let's see if I can find a good one for you. Good. I mean, you're. No, that one's too long. Let's see if I can find a good one there. A man knocked over her son in the subway. You feel your own body wince. He's okay, but the son of a bitch kept walking. She says she grabbed the stranger's arm and told him to apologize. I told him to look at the boy and apologize. Yes, and you want it to stop. You want the child pushed to the ground, to be seen, to be helped to his feet, to be brushed off by the person that did not see him, has never seen him, has perhaps never seen anyone who is not a reflection of himself. The beautiful thing is that a group of men began to stand behind me like a fleet of bodyguards, she says, like newly found uncles and brothers. So that's perhaps a more positive, a more hopeful microaggression prose poem than some of the others. We also have, for me, the most interesting part, which is a middle, or the second section of the book, which is about Serena Williams, the tennis player, and kind of her experience as a black player in a predominantly white sport, and also a dominant black player, one of the best to ever play the game. And so there were a lot of interesting parallels with Arthur Ashe, and if you've been watching for a while over the summer, I read a couple of books about Arthur Ashe, a biography and Levels of the Game, a short book about a match that he played in the 60s. And Arthur Ashe is explicitly referenced in this book as a forerunner to Serena Williams, as Althea Gibson was referenced in the Ashe book as an African American woman who played professional tennis even earlier than him. But Ashe famously kind of was a very cool character. He though he was politically active and intellectual, he always kind of maintained his composure on the court, and it was this is in contrast to people like Jimmy Connors and John McEnroe, who would be kind of flamboyantly erratic and irascible, would argue with the referees and such. And Serena Williams also had run-ins with what she thought were unfair judges or umpires. I'm not sure what the word is. Officials in tennis, and though Ashe, partly from his training, would never really contest a call, even if it was obviously erroneous. He would never contest a call against him, and Serena Williams does, and there are some incidents related in here of her confronting the officials about unfair calls, as she thought. Anyway, ultimately, there's another section in this book that kind of doesn't really work for me, which is kind of... They're scripts. So they're called scripts for situation videos that she did in collaboration with one John Lucas, who is, I think, a video artist, and I think might be her husband. And they don't really, for me, they didn't really hold up on their own. They might be better if you actually see the videos or the installations that they're supposed to go with. So anyway, it was definitely interesting. It's not really, to my mind, poetry, but if you want to look at kind of the state of racial consciousness in some parts of America in the pre-2020 racial reckoning era, certainly very interesting reading. Also, this was on the infamous New York Times 100 Best Books of the 21st Century so far, and it was the only poetry book on that list, which maybe says something about the esteem in which modern poetry is held, because there's really not much. There's not a lot of what you would traditionally think of as poetry in this book. The last section is kind of a long, it's not even that long, but is more like what you think of when you think of poetry, short lines. But anyway, it was worth reading. I probably won't read it again. I would probably read something else by Claudia Rankine if I come across it. So there you go. I also read on my Kindle. This I also wasn't that thrilled with. Oh, it's not showing up. Not cover. I read Days at the Morisaki Bookshop by Satoshi Yagisawa. So this is a Japanese novel in translation. It was free on Kindle Unlimited. It's a short little thing about a young woman who experiences a romantic disappointment and quits her job and is offered free room by her uncle, who happens to own a used bookshop in the city of Tokyo. So she takes him up on the offer, kind of gets her life back together. The uncle is he's living largely as a bachelor, even though he's married, but his wife has sort of disappeared for 5 years. So the first half of the book kind of is about Takako, the main character, discovering a love of reading, getting into literature from working at this bookshop, exploring the neighborhood around it. Apparently this is part of a neighborhood in Tokyo that's famous for having lots of bookstores. So she kind of gets her life back together, maybe sort of starts to flirt with a guy at the coffee shop, and then she moves on. She gets a new job, she moves into another apartment. Then there's a break, and the second half is the uncle's wife, who has been estranged. She returns and starts living in the room over the bookshop where the main character had been living. And there's sort of she's not really back with the uncle. It's kind of a little bit vague, and the uncle doesn't seem interested. It's I found people's motivations and activities in this book to be just almost impossible to understand. Like, why are they just not talking about what's going on with them? And then in other cases, this book just kind of just says things, like it kind of just explicitly lays things out in a way that is unimaginative, I thought. So at a certain point she meets a young man at a coffee shop, and she's talking to him, and she says, and he turned out to be really funny, but there's nothing in the dialogue that he says that's actually funny. Not a single thing. Maybe it's not to my sense of humor, but anyway, this book wasn't really for me. I don't think I'll read. There's a sequel to it, More Days at the Morisaki Bookshop. Probably won't read it, but I was reading this on my Kindle late at night as my I Can't Fall Asleep book, and my wife would say, "What are you reading?" I'd say, "This book about a Japanese bookstore is not very good." And she'd say, why don't you read something else? And I said, I guess it's short and I'm almost done. I don't know. Do you ever have that? If it's short, you'll just power through just to see if it gets better? And it wasn't bad. The second half, not as much book talk in it, but it does have kind of a nice travel log where they go to, she and the aunt go to a shrine up on top of a mountain, which is a little bit nice. But ultimately, this book didn't really work for me. Okay, one that I've been sort of slowly reading through is Suetonius' The 12 Caesars. This week I read the chapter on Claudius, and I may have said before, I'm a fan of the BBC I, Claudius, so I kind of thought I would have some affection for the character of Claudius. I mean, he turns out to be somewhat more of a scoundrel than he's portrayed in the miniseries, but still there are some amusing things in here. He was the emperor, of course, but also served some terms as consul. And before Julius Caesar and Augustus, consul was the highest rank in the Roman Republic, and was typically held by two people. Even into the era when Rome was an empire and it was ruled by one man, they still had the rank of consul, and sometimes the emperor would serve briefly as consul. It's the Roman system of government, very, very strange. But so he would serve as consul, and as part of the duties of consul, he would have to sort of rule on disputes, rule on court cases, as it were. Here it says, his behavior in hearing and deciding cases varied unpredictably. Sometimes he was wise and prudent, sometimes thoughtless and hasty, sometimes downright foolish and apparently out of his senses. Here's one that I thought was interesting. During a wrangle between counsel as to whether a man accused of wrongfully posing as a Roman citizen should wear a Roman toga or a Greek mantle in court, Claudius demonstrated his fair-mindedness by making him wear a mantle when accused and a toga when defended. Before one case opened, it is said he wrote out the following verdict, which he subsequently delivered. Quote, "I decide in favor of the party which has told the truth," end quote. Such behavior so greatly discredited Claudius that he came into open and widespread contempt. So I guess he's like, let me tell you what I'm going to do. I mean, that's pretty hilarious. I'm going to write it down ahead of time and then read. There's also, there was another very strange thing in here. This is something that I'd never heard of in reading about the ancient Romans. I'm not that big of an ancient Roman guy, but I do like to read about them sometimes. Here's one I'd never heard of. Claudius never behaved less formally than at these picnics. Okay, so it's talking about some picnics that he had. Claudius never behaved less formally than at these picnics, exposing his left hand in plebeian fashion when he distributed prizes, instead of keeping it decently covered by his toga, and counting the number of gold pieces on his fingers. 1, 2, 3, he would shout. I had no idea that patrician Romans were not supposed to expose their left hand. That is something I never read of. But anyway, there you go. Nero is next. I'm going to try and finish this one this week. We've got Nero, and then the year of the three emperors, and then I forget what the dynasty that starts after the Flavians, is it? So anyway, there's that. Now we come to the colossal read-alongs that I'm immersed in. I've read a few more nights of the 1001 Nights from the Arabian Nights. I'm still in the Tale of the Porter, which just kind of keeps unspooling into one nested story after another. Some of them quite brutal. I will not lie. Some of them are sort of shocking in their sudden violence and cruelty. But you gotta keep going. Gotta find out what's gonna happen next. It's pretty good. All right. I've just finished my reading for the Brothers and Sisters Karamazov read-along. That's The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky. I'm reading the Cat's translation. A lot of people are. So this week we read Book 5, which contains the famous episode, The Grand Inquisitor. I heard about this long before I ever read this book, but it's apparently a famous chapter. This whole section kind of was a turn for me. Like the first 4, I think they're called books, right? So the first 4 books, I was really getting into it. And then this 5th one starts with Alyosha sort of leaving his elder, and he's going on these rounds, and he does some rather baffling things, but he gets engaged to Lisa, who is in a wheelchair, and then he goes to his house. He has some words with Smerdyakov. Everyone's always having these weird encounters with Smerdyakov, and then he meets his brother Ivan at a tavern, and they have this confrontation in which Ivan, who is, I guess you would say he's an atheist, and Alyosha, who is almost a monk, even though he's been told to leave the monastery and get married, thus the betrothal. But Ivan is kind of, well, they have this meeting so they can get to know each other, which they're brothers, but they were raised kind of apart from each other. And Ivan is just being extremely harsh with Alyosha and telling him about all these incidents of cruelty to children. And it's tough to read. And people in our Discord discussion were commenting on how hard it was to read that chapter. And then he launches into what he calls a prose poem called The Grand Inquisitor. And so The Grand Inquisitor is a story, so it's all told. It's Ivan relating this story. And this book is very heavy and it's awkward to read. It's floppy, which I like, but it's also kind of just a little bit too large in its dimensions like that. So I'm going to put it down for a second. So The Grand Inquisitor, it's a story that takes place during the Inquisition. The period in the 1500s when the Roman Catholic Church is persecuting heretics and Jews and Muslims and trying to impose a stricter orthodoxy, and the Jesuits were largely involved in these persecutions. And by persecute, people are being executed for various heresies. So the Grand Inquisitor sees that a figure has appeared in the crowd one day, and this figure is obviously to everyone the returned Jesus Christ. So the Grand Inquisitor, the head of these persecutions, he has Jesus Christ arrested, and he brings him into a cell and meets him to interrogate him. But he doesn't actually ask him any questions. He just he monologues at him. So he tells him his thoughts about how Jesus should have saved humanity, how he failed, how he was tempted in the desert by the devil, who said, "Why don't you turn the stones into bread? Why don't you perform miracles? Why don't you throw yourself off this height?" Testing his faith. And the Grand Inquisitor doesn't ask him to respond to any questions. He says, what you should have done, you should have taken the devil's suggestions, and it would have been a lot better to save all of humanity by not giving them freedom to choose, by sort of basically coddling them, giving them everything they need, taking care of them, keeping them in the dark. Let there be 100,000 people in the whole earth, say, who will be responsible for administering them. They can have the knowledge. They can be tormented. But they'll know that all these people, they'll be happy, they'll be content, they'll be unified, as they'll feel themselves part of one human family, and then they'll die, and they'll just go out. They'll just be gone. They'll be annihilated. Because there's no afterlife, and the rest of us will administer. Will know. That's how you should have done it. The Grand Inquisitor is telling Jesus. It seems to me that is. And then, did I say I was going to give away what happens in the Brothers Karamazov? And so then at the end, Jesus gets up and kisses the Grand Inquisitor on the lips and leaves. He takes his leave. So now, since this is just a story that Ivan is making up, he doesn't have to account for the fact that they're in a prison and Jesus. But it is Jesus, so maybe he has powers and he can. But anyway, and then Alyosha, who's been listening to this whole story, he gets up and he kisses his brother Ivan on the lips. And Ivan, this is the funniest thing that happens in this entire section. Ivan says, "That's plagiarism," which is pretty funny. Then, let's see, Ivan goes back to his father's house, has a weird encounter with Smerdyakov, which seems like it's setting up for either clues or red herrings for a murder, which we know that someone is going to get murdered. But then it turns out that murder doesn't happen that night. Well, okay, so no one gets murdered that night, I should say. Right. And Ivan gets up in the morning, says, "I'm going to Moscow." His dad says, "Why don't you do this errand for me?" Ivan says, "Okay, I'll do it." And gets on the train and doesn't do it. The next day, Smerdyakov falls down a flight of stairs, has an epileptic fit, and is kind of confined to the bed. He's unconscious. And that is this section of the Brothers Karamazov. So I'm going to keep on. We're reading the next two books of this book in the next week. To be honest, I found this last book of it, book 5, to be kind of a bit of a slog. People say that it's one of the more important philosophical chapters, so maybe it will resonate with the rest of it. Okay. Also, I'm reading the books of Jacob by Olga Tokarczuk, as you know if you watch this channel, and we're about halfway through this one. It's a slow read led by Jess of Stalking Kafka. And we read the Book of the Road this week. The Sabbatarians have returned to Poland. They were exiled in the previous chapters. They were exiled to Wallachia, which is modern day Romania, roughly, and sort of established a community there. Then they kind of get themselves invited back into the Polish Commonwealth. So there are the various historical events sort of take place in here, such as these disputations between the Talmudists and the anti-Talmudists. So the Talmudists are the traditional Jews, and the anti-Talmudists are this group of Sabbatarians or Frankists or Jacobite, the people who are following Jacob, and who. So they were kind of I guess they were public debates at the end of which a bunch of Talmuds were burned, and this happened historically. Talmuds were gathered up, and also it kind of turned into a bit of a general pogrom where all kinds of Jewish books were gathered up and were burned and destroyed, and Jews were beaten and attacked, including, and it wasn't just limited to Talmudists, because we know that Elisha Shore, who is sort of in the faction with Jacob Frank. He gets a lot of his books burned, and he gets beaten, and then goes and takes refuge in Wallachia with the Frankists. But at the end, they are returning into Poland to reestablish a community there. There is also something of the various scandals around their religious practices, their kind of secret ceremonies, which involve nudity and partner switching, and Jacob Frank will just sort of take people and assign them to have sex with each other's husbands and wives, and he has some ideas around that, and also. So they're coming back into Poland, and there are some bishops who think that they're going to achieve greatness by getting all these formerly Jews, then they kind of converted to Islam, and he's going to get them to convert to Catholicism, and it's going to be a great triumph for the Catholic Church. We will see if it turns out to be so. But anyway, it's been a couple of days since I read this. I filled my head with Karamazov nonsense in between, so I might be a bit fuzzy on some of the details. Going to get back into this week. We have the Book of the Comet coming up. We're midway through the book, and there's a comet. I know of another book in which that happens. Do you? Anyway, that's what I have. Thanks for watching. Talk to you later. Bye.